Amara Okoye woke up early that morning, her heart quietly hoping that this year might be different. The soft sun slipped through the curtains of her small apartment in Lagos as she smiled at the thought of her birthday. She had always been the kind of woman who celebrated others, remembering dates, giving thoughtful gifts, and baking cakes even when her wallet was thin. But as the hours passed, her phone stayed still. No ring, no vibration, no message. The silence began to feel heavy. She checked her family group chat, scrolling through jokes and random talks from her brothers and mother. Not a single happy birthday. She forced a smile and whispered to herself, maybe they'll remember later. She decided to make her own day bright. She dressed in her favorite blue gown, brushed her hair neatly, and went to a nearby shop to buy a small slice of cake. The shopkeeper smiled, wishing her a happy birthday when she mentioned it was her special day. That small kindness made her eyes water. At home, she lit a candle, turned on her favorite Afro-soul song, and sang softly while cutting the cake alone. She imagined her family around her laughing, teasing, singing, but reality stayed quiet. Every sound in her apartment echoed. When the candle's flame flickered out, she felt the emptiness grow deeper. She thought of how often she'd gone out of her way for her family, helping with bills, cooking during holidays, always putting them before herself. Yet when it came to her, no one remembered. Evening came, and she sat by her window watching the city lights glow. The laughter of neighbors celebrating somewhere nearby made her chest ache a little. Still, she whispered, "It's okay, Amara. You have yourself." She looked at the sky and smiled faintly. In that quiet moment, something inside her shifted, a small spark of strength, the kind that grows in silence. She didn't know it yet, but this lonely birthday would become the turning point of her life. The world might have ignored her today, but destiny was already planning something extraordinary for tomorrow. 2 days after her quiet and lonely birthday, Amara Okoye was washing dishes when her old phone began to ring. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, she thought it was a mistake. When she answered, a calm male voice introduced himself as a lawyer from Enugu. He said he represented the estate of Madam Ifeoma Nwodo, her great-aunt. Amara froze, her hand still holding a wet plate. The name sounded distant yet familiar. A woman she barely remembered but who had once called her the golden-hearted child. The lawyer continued, explaining that Madam Ifeoma had passed away weeks ago and had left something important in her will for Amara. Her heart began to beat faster. She sat down slowly, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The lawyer asked her to visit their office in person to complete the legal process. After ending the call, she stared at her phone in disbelief. Why her? Her great-aunt had so many relatives. She barely stayed in touch with anyone. Still, something deep inside told her this wasn't an ordinary call. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed memories of the old woman in her mind. The elegant lady in white lace, smelling of lavender, who once placed a red beaded necklace around her neck when she was a little girl. "Never lose your kindness," she had said. Amara remembered that warmth clearly now. Maybe her great-aunt had seen something special in her long before anyone else did. The next morning, Amara packed a small bag and boarded a bus to Enugu. The ride was long and dusty, but her mind was filled with curiosity. When she arrived at the lawyer's office, she felt nervous but calm. The office smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The lawyer smiled gently and handed her a sealed envelope. Amara opened it slowly, her hands trembling. As her eyes read the words inside, tears began to fall. She had just inherited something far greater than she could ever imagine. The world that forgot her 2 days ago was about to see her in a way it never had before. And this time, she wouldn't be ignored again. Amara sat in the lawyer's office with her hands tightly clasped together. The ticking clock on the wall felt louder than usual as she waited for him to speak. He adjusted his glasses, opened a brown file, and smiled gently. "Miss Amara Okoye," he said softly, "your great-aunt Madam Ifeoma Nwodo named you as the sole heir to her estate." Amara blinked, unsure if she heard him right. The lawyer continued, explaining that Madam Ifeoma's entire fortune, amounting to $1.6 million, was now hers. For a few seconds, the room went silent except for the sound of Amara's heartbeat. Tears filled her eyes. She thought of the woman she barely knew, the one who once told her, "You have the heart of gold." She never imagined those words would come back in such a powerful way. The lawyer handed her a letter that her great-aunt had written before her passing. The note said that she had watched Amara's life from afar, her struggles, her sacrifices, and how she continued to show love even when others ignored her. You gave kindness without expecting anything, the letter read. So now life gives you what you deserve. Amara pressed the letter to her chest, unable to stop the tears from falling. Her mind went blank for a moment. All her life, she had known what it felt like to be forgotten. She had worked hard, stayed humble, and never complained. And now, without asking for it, she had been rewarded in a way that felt almost unreal. The lawyer showed her documents for the properties, the savings, and the investments she now owned. Each page felt heavier than the last. She couldn't believe that such a blessing had found its way to her, especially after such a lonely birthday. She left the office in quiet shock, holding the letter tightly as if it were gold. Outside, the city of Enugu looked brighter, the air lighter. She smiled through her tears, whispering to herself, maybe kindness really does come back. That day, the woman who was forgotten by everyone finally felt seen by destiny itself. Amara walked out of the lawyer's office feeling like the air around her had changed. The world looked the same, yet she felt completely new inside. For the first time in her life, she had something powerful in her hands. Not just money, but a chance to live differently. Still, she didn't feel the need to run home and tell everyone. As she sat in a taxi heading back to Lagos, she stared out of the window, thinking deeply. She knew her family. They cared only when it suited them. They laughed when she struggled, and they disappeared when she needed help. So she made a quiet promise to herself she would tell no one. Back home, her phone buzzed with messages, but none were from her family. It didn't hurt as much this time. She smiled softly and whispered, "Now I know who truly stands with me." She placed her aunt's letter on her small table and looked at it every few minutes, as if it were a friend reminding her to stay grounded. The thought of $1.6 million in her name felt unreal, but instead of dreaming about cars and gold jewelry, she thought of peace. She imagined buying a home where no one could insult her, a space filled with quiet joy and warm light. The next day, she went to work as usual, wearing her simple clothes and carrying her old handbag. No one knew that the woman sweeping the office floors now owned a fortune. When her coworkers complained about low pay, she listened, offered them tea and smiled. Her calmness surprised everyone. Inside her heart, there was no anger, no pride, only peace. That night, she sat near her window and watched the stars. She thought about how people only saw her as small, yet her great-aunt had seen her worth long ago. Amara didn't want to change just because life had blessed her. She wanted to stay the same, kind, patient, and real. She breathed in the cool night air and said softly, "Let me see their hearts first." Her voice carried a quiet strength, the kind that grows in silence. It was her secret joy, pure, gentle, and powerful enough to change everything soon. When Amara arrived at her cousin Ngozi's birthday party, the house was already filled with laughter and loud music. The smell of jollof rice and grilled chicken filled the air, and colorful balloons hung from every corner. Everyone was dressed in bright clothes and expensive jewelry. Amara wore a simple blue dress with small earrings, neat but plain. She had bought a small perfume as a gift, wrapped it with care, and handed it to Ngozi with a warm smile. Her cousin accepted it but quickly placed it aside without even opening it. The gesture stung, but Amara stayed quiet and kept her smile gentle. As she sat among her relatives, the conversations turned sharp. Her brother Tund laughed loudly and said, "Amara never changes. Always simple, always broke." The others chuckled. Another cousin added, "She doesn't even try to look fancy. Maybe she's saving money for her dreams of nothing." The room filled with laughter, and Amara just sipped her drink slowly, pretending not to care. But inside her heart sank. None of them remembered how they had forgotten her own birthday, just a few weeks earlier. Not a message, not a call. And now, they joked as if she didn't have feelings. Still, she didn't defend herself. She looked at them, her family who valued looks and money more than hearts, and she saw how blind they were. Every cruel word they said only made her stronger inside. She smiled politely, helping to serve food, clearing plates, even laughing when they teased her again. To them, she was the quiet one who would never have more than she already did. But Amara knew something they didn't. She had already been blessed far beyond their imagination. When the party ended, She walked home under the city lights, her gift of perfume still unappreciated, but her spirit calm. The laughter that once hurt now sounded empty in her memory. She whispered to herself, "They mock what they don't understand." The night air brushed her face gently, and she smiled faintly. She no longer needed their approval. They had ignored her worth. But soon the truth would shine so brightly that even those who laughed at her would have no choice but to see it. Weeks passed, and Amara's life began to change in quiet, powerful ways. She traveled to her great-aunt's old mansion in the peaceful outskirts of Enugu. A once beautiful home now covered in dust and silence. The paint had faded, the garden was dry, and the windows were cracked, but to Amara, it looked like a treasure waiting to shine again. She stood in the doorway and whispered, "Let's bring this place back to life." From that day, she started the work. She hired local builders, painters, and gardeners, choosing hardworking people who needed jobs. She paid them fairly, sometimes giving extra food or clothes to their families. Everyone admired her humility, not knowing the size of her fortune. She spent her mornings checking on the workers, sharing smiles and encouragement, and her evenings sitting on the mansion's wide steps, watching the sunset. Bit by bit, the mansion began to glow again. Fresh paint, new lights, a restored garden full of flowers. The once forgotten house became a place of hope. The workers respected her deeply, saying, "Madam Amara treats us like family." She never showed pride. She just said, "We rise by lifting others." She quietly started buying small pieces of land nearby, planning to build homes for women who had nowhere to go. Her heart was full of dreams, not for herself, but for those who had been ignored like she once was. When strangers asked how she managed to do so much, she simply smiled and said, "I'm just helping how I can." No one in her family knew anything. To them, she was still the simple girl they laughed at. Sometimes, she would pass by her mother's house, watching from a distance as her brothers joked and bragged about their lives. She didn't feel bitterness, only peace. She had learned that real success didn't need noise. Her joy came from the silence of doing good without applause. At night, as she looked at the glowing mansion she had rebuilt, she felt proud. Not because of the money, but because she had turned pain into purpose. Her quiet rise had begun, not through showing off, but through kindness that spoke louder than wealth ever could. Not long after the mansion began to shine again, whispers started spreading through the town. People who passed by would stop and stare at the beautiful gates, wondering who the new owner was. Someone told Amara's cousin that they had seen her coming out of the house wearing a fine dress and greeting builders like a boss. Within days, gossip reached her family. They didn't know about the inheritance, so they made their own story. "Amara must have met a rich man," one of her brothers said proudly, pretending to believe it was true. Suddenly, the same people who ignored her birthday now acted like she was their favorite person. Her mother began calling every morning asking, "My daughter, are you eating well?" Her brothers started sending messages like, "Sister, we should visit you this weekend." Her cousin Ngozi, who once mocked her perfume gift, came by with a big smile and said, "We've missed you so much." Amara noticed how different they were now. The sudden sweetness in their voices, the fake concern, the forced laughter. Inside, she felt both amused and sad. They visited her often, pretending it was just to spend time together, but their eyes always searched around. They looked at her clothes, her handbag, and her phone, as if trying to find clues about her rich man. Amara played along, answering kindly but never revealing the truth. She cooked for them, listened to their jokes, and smiled through their fake compliments. She wanted to see how far they would go. At night, when they left, she sat in her quiet home and thought about how easily love changes when money is involved. The same hearts that forgot her birthday were now full of sudden affection. It didn't make her angry, it just made her wiser. She finally saw who truly cared, and who cared only when they thought she had something to give. Her silence became her power. The world could talk and assume whatever it wanted. She didn't need to explain herself. She simply whispered to herself, "Let them keep guessing. The truth will speak for itself." Amara decided it was time to see if her family's new kindness was real, or just another mask. One evening, she visited her mother's house with a calm smile, and sat with everyone in the living room. After a few minutes of light talk, she brought up a story about her elderly neighbor, Mama Lady, who had been rushed to the hospital. The bill was more than the woman's children could afford, and the doctors were asking for an urgent payment. Amara looked at her family gently and said, "I thought maybe we could all put something together to help her. Even a small amount from each of us will make a difference." The room went quiet. Her brother Tund cleared his throat and quickly said he had no money because his car needed repairs. Her mother sighed and said she wasn't feeling well and had to save for her medicines. Her cousin Ngozi smiled awkwardly and said she had spent everything on her birthday party. Another brother pretended to get a call and stepped outside, never returning to answer. Every single person came up with an excuse within seconds. Not one person asked how much was needed. Not one person asked about the old woman's condition. Amara watched them silently as each excuse piled up like a wall blocking their true hearts. Just a week ago, these same people called her every day, visited her often, and acted as if she was the most important person in their lives. Now, when help was needed for someone else, they suddenly had nothing to offer. She didn't push or argue. She just nodded, thanked them for listening, and stood up slowly. Inside, she felt a deep, painful clarity. Their love was not real. It was tied to what they thought she had, not who she was. When she left the house that night, the street felt colder, but her mind was clearer than ever. She realized she could no longer pretend their affection was sincere. Their hearts had answered her without knowing it. She walked home quietly, whispering to herself, "Now I know the truth." The test had revealed everything she needed to see. A week after testing her family, Amara decided it was time for the truth to come out. She called her mother and brothers early one morning and said with a calm voice, "I want you all to come with me today. There's something important I need to show you." They asked where, but she only replied, "You'll see." Curiosity filled their voices as they agreed. That afternoon, she drove them through quiet roads lined with tall palm trees until they reached the shining gates of her great-aunt's mansion. The place looked grand, freshly painted walls, trimmed gardens, and tall golden lamps glowing in the sun. Her mother gasped, covering her mouth. "This house looks like something from a movie," she whispered. Her brothers exchanged surprised glances, asking, "Who lives here?" Amara smiled and simply said, "Come inside." The living room glowed with new furniture, art pieces, and beautiful African designs. They walked slowly, staring at everything in amazement. Finally, Amara stood at the center and said softly, "You've been wondering how my life changed. This is the home of Madame Ifeoma Nwodo, my late great-aunt. She left it to me, along with her entire fortune." The room went silent. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. One brother dropped the cup he was holding. Another just stared in disbelief. "You inherited all this?" her mother asked, her voice shaking. Amara nodded gently. "Yes, Mama. Everything." Tears ran down her mother's face as she said, "We ignored you, my child. We treated you unfairly, and still you never stopped being kind." Amara walked closer and hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "I just wanted to see your hearts. Now I know." Her brothers stood quietly, guilt written on their faces. They couldn't meet her eyes. Amara didn't speak with anger. She only said, "I didn't need your money. I just needed your love." The truth hung heavy in the air, breaking their pride more than any words could. As they sat together in the grand hall, her family finally saw the woman they once mocked, strong, graceful, and blessed beyond measure. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with regret, love, and the beginning of something new. A full year passed since the day Amara revealed her inheritance, and life had quietly changed. The once cold faces in her family now carried warmth. Her mother visited often, bringing home-cooked meals and laughter that used to be missing. Her brothers, who once teased her for being too simple, now spoke of her with pride. They had all learned something that money could never teach: the true meaning of love, respect, and family. On Amara's next birthday, the house that once felt too big and silent was alive with joy. Colorful balloons hung from the walls, the aroma of jollof rice and spicy chicken filled the air, and laughter echoed through every room. Her mother stood beside her, glowing with happiness, saying, "This year we celebrate you for who you are, not for what you have." Amara smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the quiet one or the forgotten one. She felt seen, valued, and deeply loved. Her friends came too, carrying small gifts and big smiles. The mansion was filled with music, dance, and genuine laughter. No one asked her about money or property, Instead, they shared memories, jokes, and gratitude. Her brothers helped serve food, something they never used to do. When it was time to cut the cake, they surrounded her, singing loudly and off-key, but with pure love. As she blew out the candles, Amara closed her eyes and silently thanked her great-aunt for the lesson that changed everything. That true wealth isn't measured by money, but by the hearts that surround you. She looked around the room, seeing her family holding hands and smiling at one another. It was a moment of peace she had once dreamed of, but never thought she'd feel so deeply. That night, as the stars twinkled outside the grand windows, Amara stood on the balcony and whispered, "This is what I was waiting for. No pride, no bitterness, just calm joy." Her story had come full circle. The girl who once sat alone at forgotten birthdays was now celebrated with love so real it healed every old wound. And in that moment, she finally understood. Peace blooms when love becomes the greatest inheritance of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed Amara's journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring African life stories. See you in the next video. New stories every day on Nabira Folktales.